everyone, Tyler DeLuca back here with my takeaways from this week in women's basketball, and the college basketball season is in full swing. We are officially here, the games are being played, and I have some key takeaways from this first week so far. Let's start off with day one though. And who better team to start off with the number one team in the nation, South Carolina. They end up beating Michigan in a game that was closer than I think anybody had anticipated at all, and I'm intrigued. And let me preface this before getting into any of these takeaways that this is obviously game one, week one. So much can change, but just from these very first knee-jerk reaction, first game takeaways, South Carolina is one of the teams I'm most interested by, and not even in a worry type of way. But the one thing that has been constant with South Carolina throughout, the past decade or so, was not there in game one, and that was having a true dominant post-up big. In the past decade, it's gone from Asia Wilson to Aaliyah Boston, to Camila Cardoso. We didn't really see that in game one, in the sense of having a true option number one, work inside out, back to the basket big. And now I think that they have players on this roster that can develop into it, such as freshman Joyce Edwards, who is incredibly highly touted, and I feel rightfully so. Chloe Kitts was phenomenal in this game as a big, but just got it done in a different way than we have kind of grown accustomed to with South Carolina under Dawn Staley. And the biggest shift now is the number one option, to me, are now the guards. And we haven't seen that from a South Carolina team in a very long time. Honestly, last season was the first time we really saw three-point shooting at all from a South Carolina team at an increased high volume. And in this game, it felt like the number one option for this team. And that's just very different. It's not inherently wrong. It's not a sign that South Carolina is going to be a bad team by any means. But I think it leaves room for more variance than in the past with South Carolina. Just off naturally, it's harder to make three-pointers than it is to have a dominant back-to-the-basket big shooting layups at the rim. It's just different. And I will be incredibly interested in seeing how this develops, in the sense of, if that remains true. It felt like it in the first game, and players struggled from three-point land, and I think that's a large reason as to why the game was close with Michigan. We'll certainly see against NC State if that remains the same. I'm just incredibly intrigued, because it just feels like the end might be the same in the sense of South Carolina being a very, very, very good team, and I think that's the most likely outcome. But the means to the end might just look completely different for South Carolina this season. Just a different equation for South Carolina this season. And I'm just interested in seeing how it works. Again, it might be completely different from this game and the read on it to where we end up at the end of the season. Because again, this is just first game reactions. But that was my biggest takeaway from South Carolina, is it didn't seem they had the dominance inside that we've just grown so accustomed to with South Carolina. And I'm just interested in seeing how that goes. Another team that definitely needs work on the offensive end and the half court is USC. No secret that USC comes into this season as, I'd say, in terms of talk, the most highly touted. Like, obviously South Carolina is still South Carolina. And heck, even UConn, once they become healthy. But when it comes just to the sheer excitement of like what we are going to see on the court, USC was number one in that. Kiki Iriofin is one of the top 5 players in the country. Juju Watkins is one of the top 5 players in the country. And in the preseason, it felt like the pick and roll between those two was just going to be automatic, almost. And maybe that was oversimplifying on my part. And it just seemed really difficult against Ole Miss a lot of the time in the half court. And I think it's important to emphasize that Ole Miss is also a very good defense and probably one of the best defenses that they'll face, at least in the non-con. One of the best defenses that they'll end up facing. And it's obviously first game, new players, so I'm not pulling any fire alarms or anything. I just anticipated it to look a bit more natural just immediately off rip in the season. And them not having that is just very interesting to me. We saw turnovers were a huge struggle for USC in this game. And Juju Watkins, it's just different from last season. And she's being asked to do different things, and notably the increase in playmaking. And that is something that she's going to have to learn. And it's fine. There's something inherently wrong with that. It's just something that she has to learn. Because last season we saw, if you're an NBA fan, it felt very Houston Rockets, James Harden prime, where you had just shooters around your star player, and the star player goes ISO and is capable of kicking it out. And I think a lot of times the Ivy League transfers, such as Mackenzie Forbes, who won Pac-12 tournament MVP, a lot of times those players were just underrated. And it's a different style than what this team is trying to do this year surrounding Juju Watkins. But the floor spacing is something that I have some concerns about after seeing this first game. And I certainly think that this is the worst that USC will be. You're playing in Paris. It's the first game. You're playing a good defense that's been together. Like there's a lot of contributing factors to why I feel like USC looked the way that they did. But that doesn't negate the fact that there's work to do. And I'm interested in seeing the machine become presumably more well-oiled. Because right now it was clunky. And I'm just excited to see what that looks like, honestly, for USC, and seeing Juju Watkins continue to progress as a playmaker. And I also think that Talia von Oelhoffen got into foul trouble early, and because of that, Juju Watkins had the ball in her hands potentially more than we might be further anticipating throughout this season, and seeing Juju maybe even a little bit more off ball and seeing how that works. But I just don't think we really got the chance to really see that in that way in this first game, just due to foul trouble and things of that nature. Just for the two of the biggest teams in the country, there's immediate talking points or question marks, if you want to call it that, but I don't know if I'd really go that far with it in sense of it being like a negative thing, because I do think that these two teams are absolutely going to figure out their system, their equation to success. But it's just interesting because it's just different from last year for both of these teams that saw great success. So it's just going to be figuring out new ways of doing it and figuring out exactly how those pieces fall into place. And just a smaller point as the last one, don't sleep on this freshman class, y'all. Please, 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 please. Don't sleep on this freshman class. I know the last year's freshman class was probably the greatest freshman class that we've ever seen. And I know the bar is incredibly high. But don't sleep on this freshman class. Even just in this first week, we've seen some insane performances. Most notably, Silas Swords from Michigan against South Carolina. We saw Jelani Cambridge for Ohio State was fantastic in her first game. Taj Roberts for Louisville was really, really solid against UCLA. Like, these are solid players that are making immediate impacts on a varying level of expectations team-wise. And they're making immediate impacts not too dissimilar to what we saw last year. So, while absolutely and correctly the bar is incredibly high to reach, and there was so much talk about the freshman class last year with Juju, Hannah Hidalgo, Madison Booker, Audi Crooks, so many, honestly, across the country that, like, normally any other year would be the top freshmen. Like, you're looking are now, like, the top 10 to 15, you know? There's so much to be excited about with the young players in college basketball right now, and I just don't want us underrating the freshman class that is coming in and the potential that they have to make immediate impacts and the fun in telling their stories that we can have just because last year's freshman class was so incredible. So the bar is high. I'm not saying this new freshman class is about to go and do the things and be the conference players of the year that we saw last year. But don't sleep on this freshman class. I'm excited. The college basketball season is here. I can't wait to be with you guys throughout it all, and I will see you next time.